It's 19 hours.
Good evening, friends. Good evening, my for good friends. It's another day, another evening at the Gnitavonni Book Club, and of course, we had a introductory sound. The music that you're listening to is another interesting musical piece from one of the great masters of Yoruba music, in particular Nigerian music, the great chief Ebenezer Obey, and that song called in Enirinkohi is one of the most popular Yoruba songs. It's a reflective song. And also very poignant to remember that song as it is Mental Health Week, because that song addresses a lot of the underlying anxieties that people have, either as a family or as a group and a community or as a country, as a nation, in terms of what challenges we are facing, or as we are facing a global pandemic, how are we dealing with it? And that is part of the theme of that song. And the reason, of course, why that song is there is because I have taken it as I've written a poem around that song. It was one of those songs that I used to listen to with my parents many, many years ago as a child. And it was also a song that many of our people, the elders usually, would use to illustrate to you about life's challenges. And I think it's just very important to have that song as the opening tune to our Mental Health Week edition of the Gnitavonni Book Club. For those who, of course, know the Yoruba language, they can get it very easily. But for those who are not familiar with the Yoruba language, I think it's just quite, for me, personal vocation to bring that song alive in the English language. And it's a very poignant, quite short poem, unlike the ones rendered by other musicians that are quite lengthy in a way, because the message is very clear. So I will pause the music for a bit and read the poem to you. The poem is titled Enirinkohi, and with the English subtitle, The Usurper of Lost Jewels. And it's inspired by Ebenezer Obey. And I read, Enirinkohi, O stranger who finds another's treasure, Tofe Kupelwe. Don't fret or annihilate yourself. Do you value another's treasure and show grief than the loser himself? The world is filled with things we met. We won't take a thing with us at death. Rather think of things instructive. Many hands working together prosper. They even lift the load to their head. So do our children sometimes disagree, yet their lives need not be in disarray. Tomorrow's fortunes in advance are not known. As the earth travels, we follow in tow. Should we not unite and think anew? We invoke the powers of our ancestors and witness the tattler meet his amputator. Was there an obstacle for us to break? And if someone grabbed a single cane, a wonky rod will not kill a troublesome snake. Discover fidelity. Read your sight of scales. Isn't a knife known by its flattened blade? Unity is the key to our present plague. Don't find and huddle over another's treasure. Don't fret on annihilation. You won't leave this world with a single thing. Find content. Read your plight of every tribulation. Don't find and huddle over another's treasure. And on that note, we've finished this song so you can enjoy it.
Ọwọ́ ẹni tó ti sọnù ńkọ́. Ayé la bá, ayé la fi sílẹ̀ sí. Dúró náà, wáyé yẹ̀ wò. Àgbájọwọ́ mà ní. Wọ́n ló gbẹ́rù dórí. Àwọn ọmọ wa ẹ má jẹ́ kó tálákà. Èmi la ní o, kò máa ṣẹ́jà tó mọ́la. Ìṣẹ̀lẹ̀ ayé yìí ẹ̀dá kan jọ lẹ́yìn ni.
So that is the introductory song as we had, and what we've got now is to look into this mental health week and the books that we're trying to look at. The list of books I have I put on the page, and I've taken two of those books out, and these two books are one is an autobiographical book, nearly, actually quite so, and the book is titled The Bell Jar. The Bell Jar was written by a poet, her only novel, which was by Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath was a poet, and she died in 1963, and by suicide. She took her own life after battling depression for many years. And this book is about mental health, depression, and all that kind of things. And what happened was that in 1953, 10 years before she eventually took her own life, she attempted suicide. And she wrote this book to describe experiences, what she went through, and how she coped with the situation. But eventually, she died by suicide and depression. And what comes out of Sylvia's story is the interesting issue around what actually is mental health. What's depression? How does it get hold on people? And the way she tells our story is about her a depression, that feeling of worthlessness, or feeling of just not having any sense of why you are what you are. And after several suicide attempts, she had to go through electroconvulsive therapy. She spent time in mental institutions, and ultimately she wasn't able to beat this problem. And at the tender age of 30 years, Sylvia Plath took her own life, and in that circumstance, due to the depression that she was going through. I think why is this story important? Why is this story so important? Because I think sometimes we underestimate the impact of mental health. We sometimes don't realize that people are going through a lot, and there is a fine line between that sense of reality and of being lost and having no sense of purpose, and that sort of devaluation. This happens to some people. You have high-flying people, high achievers, and you have people who also have personal problems, out of poverty or whatever. But there's no commensuration in terms of if you're poor, you're going to have depression. Or if you're rich, you're not going to have it. Or you come from a royal family, you're not going to be depressed. And I can think very clearly about the two princes, Prince Harry and Prince William, about their work with mental health, realizing actually that your status in life does not insulate you from mental health problems. And that is why this month of May, and for this week in particular, has been dedicated to mental health awareness. And I think it's useful for all of us if you can get one of these books to buy. The Reader's Digest, which is the list I've used on the Gnitavonni Book Club page, they've nominated, so it's kind of listed 10 very good novels that talk about mental health. I have a narrative around mental health. And I think we can read a lot of heavy tomes, big books, theories and perspectives by experts, psychiatrists about mental health. But I think nothing brings the story about mental health closer than a beautiful work of fiction, which is basically being narrated in a much more lifelike, much more realistic context, so that people can feel it. People can see the characters. They come to life as a friend, a neighbor, a workmate, a parent, a child, so people can actually humanize that situation better. And again, when we talk about the arts, this also goes to the roots of the debate about the value of art, or literature, or history, or culture. And I think when you think about mental health, I think about how people don't get it. They think it's just kind of fiction, which in actual fact, we're talking about fictional works here. But actually, it is because reality becomes fiction, and fiction becomes reality. And we can therefore make the better of our understanding and experience of mental health awareness. Now, that's the unfortunate story, the sad story of Sylvia Plath in her novel Bell Jar. And I use the word carefully to say unfortunate. Of course, it's a pity that she died at such a young age, 30 years old, in 1963, which I think that is 57 years ago, something like that. 57 years ago, that's when she passed away. I think she's also left us a beautiful story, something that is almost like a self-sacrificing kind of gift that she's giving to us through that book. So I will, of course, again re-emphasize, kind of just basically highlight the book again on the Gnitavonni Book Club page on Facebook, so that you can get the link to it and go and buy it or read it or download it as you want. We're not promoting books as such. It's not, we're not here to sell books to people. It's just a kind of talk around about books and the things that we can get out of it for our benefits, for our own intellectual and emotional comfort, so to speak. So the second book that I picked out of that list is a book that dates back to a number of years. For most students of English literature, and I say that English literature as opposed to literature in English. English literature, one of the icons of English literature, of course, you know the Bronte sisters, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte. And Charlotte Bronte wrote, of course, that very popular, I don't know what word to use to describe it, but if you study English literature and you have not come across Jane Eyre, then we have to question where actually you study English literature, because the Jane Eyre is one of the most iconic books of novels in English literature, one of the most formidable. And to think about this book was written by was one of Charlotte Bronte, was one of a number of sisters, notably ourselves, Charlotte and Emily, and they were all very literary superstars in their day. And Charlotte Bronte, if I remember, was born in 1815 or so, and she died in 1855. At the time, she was a celebrity. She did written lots of books, and to think that this was a time when men dominated the literary circle, but she was actually a star. Now, to go back to this book about mental health, if you've read Jane Eyre, you remember a guy there called Rochester. It's the Mr. Rochester. And, for most of us who came across that character, he was a fairly despicable kind of guy. And what has happened is that a writer, again, let me just, when we talk about the grandfathering or the grandmothering or great-grandmothering of literary characters, what has happened in the book I'm going to talk about next is that Mr. Rochester had a wife. I think it was his first wife. And she was known as the Mad Woman. I think she was locked away in the attic, and she was a very despised character. She was characterized as the Mad Woman in the attic, like an object, a figure, a clothed hyena, and her husband did everything he could to dehumanize her, just because, of course, he wanted rid of her. Of course, if only he had known about Islam, probably could have left her alone and married his 4 wives, had his fair 4 wives, and been content, or maybe not. The important thing that I want to talk about the grandmothering or the great is that John Rhys, Jean and Rhys, has written this book called Wide Saragossa Sea. Wide Saragossa Sea. What he has done is that we all knew in Jane Eyre that this woman, this wife of Mr. Rochester, was some kind of a phantom of some kind. This was seen, was heard about, not seen, not active, some kind of disreputable character. So what Jean Rhys has done is to humanize this person and given her a name, Bertha Mason. And what he has done is to look at this violently insane woman, the wife of Edward Rochester, and try to run through her story of how she came to be what she was in to be. And in that process, he did a narrative about mental health, about how things came to be. For example, talking about the childhood of these women, how I think in the family, her brother was killed in war, and to break down stuff, issues, the wretchedness of the condition, the behaviors of some of the people in the family, and how all these have led to in a mental state of permanent anxiety, and that kind of things. Now, what I find fascinating about that book is that, again, is that gift of literary exploration, where you find a writer in the 21st century pick up a character from a literary work many, many years ago and bring it in context and just write the story about that character. And here we are in 2020 using that narrative to talk about mental health. So I think one of the reasons why I like talking about books is that it helps us to inhabit spaces and places that we're not accustomed to, and helps us to understand problems, complex problems, bring it to fore and bring it alive. And so I will suggest that in this mental health month, in the next week or so, that you still have time, do something interesting, find a book along this line, and pick one of them. There are 10 of them on the page that Reader's Digest have kind of suggested as books, and I just picked up 2, not randomly, out of a bit of exploration and looking at them. I found those 2 to be quite good stories. First, the personal story of Sylvia Plath and the tragedy of that life, but the work she left behind for us to live, to read. And then, of course, again, that historical journey into the 19th century, which basically brings together 3 centuries, the 19th, the 20th, and the 21st century, that these issues of mental health have been with us from time immemorial, and we need to be mindful of them and see whatever we can do to make best in these situations, whether we're at work or we're at play. In my line of work, I might just say, as an aside, we do, for example, have had to deal with a lot of tragedies, for example, suicides and stuff on the railway, and we've had to do some intervention to help people in that way. So there on the page, just to kind of point people out, anybody who has any kind of concerns or issues about mental health, depression, or things like that. After the program, and explore what the options are. So those are the 2 books that I've thought it worthwhile to talk about this week. And I don't want to do any more mental torture that needs to be done, but I'll just show you how I'm doing my own mental health. So I've got my nice scented coconut Noah candle by me to calm me down and make me feel refreshed. That's part of my mental health. Again, it's all about how you feel, what kind of accoutrements or paraphernalia that you like to have around you that comforts you, that kind of gives you a bit of a chill. So it could be, for example, this man. Some people have found it a bit therapeutic. For example, just like there are people who, for example, there's a branch of psychiatry where they use animals and pets for therapy and all sorts of things like that. And there are loads. What I'm going to do before we go, because I think we should have a short session today, so we can all kind of have some reflection and try and grab 1 or 2 of those books. So I'm having some kind of blip on my connection, but I hope that it stays stable for the next few minutes. So in closing, I think what I'll just do again, I want to go. So that poem I just read earlier on, I'll pick out 1 or 2 a stanza from it to kind of instruct about a point about mental health. Why we need to people need to relax and chill. As I say, take the chill pill and keep things simple. And I suppose in a COVID-19 setting, mental health is just so much more important. Many people now have found time to be more relaxed, to be more organized, think about what really matters to them. They've had time to spend with family. They've had to do a little working around different things. They recognize the boundaries between work and life and your purpose. And I think what Chief Ebenezer Obey is saying on these in this poem is that people should just take a chill pill and relax. I imagine, for example, many of us probably by now would have been on our third weekend away, something, jumping around, doing this and that. But we haven't done those things, and we're still here. And I suppose still happy, probably happier. At least, if not happier, in the pocket, because they will spend them on a frolic somewhere. I'm not saying those things are not important, they are important. But I think we should kind of round up today. Chief Ebenezer Obey's song in the background, playing in the background, and as I read the end, I read that poem because I think that poem strengthens a very powerful message about what actually it means to be chilled. So, what the great man is saying. So, the last two stanzas of the poem: discover fidelity, read your sight of scales. Isn't a knife known by its flaw? There's unity is the key to our present plague. Don't find and huddle over another's treasure. Don't fret or threaten annihilation. You will the world with a single thing. Find consolation. Read your plight of every tribulation. Don't find and huddle over another's treasure. So on that note, this week, on the short episode today, I wish you